Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are live, the Device Authority Virtual Summit 2024.
We are live. So without further ado, why don't we get going? First introductions. My name's Dave Bennett. I'm VP of Sales and Business Development for North America for Device Authority, based in lovely and calm Boston, Massachusetts in the USA. Miguel, how about you?
Oh, I am the commercial IoT lead for the Americas at Cumulocity IIoT, and I am based in today sunny Austin, Texas.
Love, I'm jealous. Well, so I'm going to introduce you real quick, and then let's get started. So Miguel's the commercial IoT lead for the Americas at Cumulocity. Miguel, I know you've been working on connected products all of your career, basically from the chip level at Texas Instruments. I know a couple of IoT startups. You were vice president of corporate IoT at Parker Hannifin, and more recently as an edge to cloud specialist with Microsoft and Azure IoT. We've collaborated with you throughout your 4-year tenure at Microsoft, very positively and productively, I might add. And I know you're excited with your role at Cumulocity. So without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you so much for the invitation to participate in the virtual summit. I'm going to give it just a few minutes to let people filter in. Maybe I'll get going proper at 10:33. I'm curious, since I cannot see who is joining the call. If we worked together in the past and you're in this call, or you just want to introduce yourself, can you just go into the questions thing and add your name and send it to me? I'm curious if there's anybody I know who has joined.
Oh, so you've got plants in the audience then? Is that what I'm hearing?
Potentially. I'm curious if there's any of my old peeps have shown up.
Okay, well,
I'll give it a minute, and then we'll get
one
going.
more minute, and then we'll go. We've got the better part of an hour, so plenty of time.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing anything on the chat, so I think I'll just dig in. It's 10:33. Again, Miguel Morales, the commercial IoT lead in the Americas for Cumulocity IoT. It's a great pleasure to be here together with Device Authority at the virtual summit. And today we're talking about the combination or the integration of IoT, of AI, and of security. And I think this is a powerful and important topic as we adopt these new AI technologies. I see Tyler. Hey, Tyler. I see Saran. Greetings. It's an important topic to discuss. So now that we can talk to our machines, what are we willing to share? I think IoT has always had the promise of giving a voice to our machines, right? Making the data about the way that they're functioning, about their state, available to enterprises and to solution providers so that they can ultimately translate that into insights on the products and ultimately to actions that optimize the operation in our enterprises. And so it gives us an opportunity to make more money or to save money. And over the years, I've come to appreciate the importance of security as an enabler. More recently, I've made a new friendship with my phone and ChatGPT. Actually, I think yesterday or the day before, they announced the new model. What's it called? 4.0, I believe. Let me check. Yeah, GPT-4.0. If you haven't tried it yet with the voice feature, it is actually very impressive. And we have this opportunity not only to figuratively give our devices a voice, but to literally give them a voice that sounds like a human. And so, what are we going to be willing to share? How do we navigate this brave new world? And that's what we're here to talk about. So, who am I? And why should you care? If I've had the pleasure of working with you before, perhaps you have some context, but for those of you who are new to Cumulocity or new to me, I studied as a computer engineer back in the day. First job out of college was a result of something my father once told me, which was, Miguel, if you know how to code, you learn to code, you will always have a job. And in a certain respect, I think he was right. So my first job out of university was writing C and assembly code for an ultra low power 16-bit microcontroller called the MSP 430. And that was really where everything started, right? Is wireless sensor networks. And then I worked for various other microcontroller, microprocessor divisions at Texas Instruments throughout the years. And Ethernet connected one of the first ARM Cortex M32 device that was launched into the market. We added Ethernet to that, made that connected. Worked for a DSP division in various commercial roles. And so I came to appreciate the hardware side of embedded systems. And when I started on my journey post-MBA in software, I think IoT was a natural extension of that. So throughout my career, I have had the pleasure of selling, deploying, building, and ultimately, working with a various number of IoT platforms. I started at Exosite, which is still there today. I was responsible for one of their strategic accounts at Parker Hannifin, and ultimately moved into Parker Hannifin, as Dave said, as the corporate director of IoT, ultimately vice president. And there I was building an IoT platform that we coined the voice of the machine to be used by by the different business units within Parker Hannifin. Also had the pleasure to license and essentially white label a litmus automation platform for manufacturing, sensor condition monitoring, and Elevate IoT, another platform for off-highway work trucks in partnership with some of those business units. I spent 4 years at Microsoft in Azure IoT. I was an edge to cloud specialist, and I was actually still keep this thing around, but this is encased in here is a little microprocessor called Azure Sphere. And so this was the result of research by Microsoft to secure the Xbox from getting hacked. And so they needed to build that digital ecosystem around the Xbox, and they needed it to be secure. So that really gave me the foundation of security that I have the luxury of sort of sharing an appreciation with Device Authority, and got to collaborate with them. They based it off of a white paper that's actually still available. It's called the 7 Properties of Highly Secure Connected Products. And it goes through kind of the system level requirements from a hardware standpoint, from an operating system standpoint, from a cloud services standpoint, that all working together really create these secure IoT solutions. And so I now have moved into Cumulocity as of May 2023, and have been here just over a year. I think we celebrated my 1-year anniversary on LinkedIn. And so I'm having a blast, but that's my journey, right? I want to talk a little bit about the journey for the industry. So the journey for the industry, this was a deck recently shared by our chief product officer, a guy called Jürgen Kramer, at our International User Group conference. And it surprised me, honestly. Like, I figure at this point, everybody's done something with IoT, right? Everybody has at least prototyped or hopefully launched connected products or connected operations solutions. But the research, here from Beecham and from IoT Analytics, which is a good group to keep track of, say that 35% of companies do not have a digital strategy. To me, that's wild. I thought we were further along. When I talk to customers, I think that many of them are in that next phase. They're probably coming around to a V2 of their IoT platform. And the reason is that, you start with the innovation or with the visionary statements of what the value of connected products can be or connected operations can be. But the reality is, and you guys may have seen this chart before, or I believe it was Jeffrey Moore that has the book called Crossing the Chasm. And the chasm is that as you go from a project to create this capability in your industry, they tend to prefer the build approach or the Lego block approach that you see. It's pretty prevalent, and that I sold for 4 years. But the reality is, as you move from, hiring a bunch of people and developing these capabilities in-house, and you start to scale up, you start to run into some tricky problems. Maybe you have to deploy globally, right? Maybe your customer's asking you to deploy your software in different hyperscaler infrastructure. You've got to deploy in China. Like, how do you put your stuff into Kubernetes and so that you can run it on Alibaba? Or how do you solve for multi-tenancy? These are some of the things that, the project-based work that people do in the early market stage of IoT adoption begin to increase in complexity. And if we're honest with ourselves, like, not all of these projects necessarily succeeded, right? So we have a lot of people that have some work here that are actively crossing the chasm, and Cumulocity is helping them do so with a buy and integrate approach. So instead of having to build the multi-tenancy and have all the infrastructure bits taken care of, that stuff gets taken care of for you, and customers can really focus on their differentiating work. And we find that this leads to faster innovation. This leads to achieving the ROI significantly better with a lower total cost of ownership. And so I think that's the conversation as people move into the mainstream market. I see I'm getting some questions. All right. So let's
I think we had a poll question we wanted to do here, Miguel.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So that's what I was thinking of. The poll question for the audience here is, can maybe Dave, you can pull that up.
I will.
What percentage of your deployed devices are now connected? I'm curious to see if this audience is more on the mainstream side or is still in some of the early stages of the initiative.
So I'm going to hit the start poll button. I've been told that it takes maybe 20 to 30 seconds for everybody to sort of get this and be able to put their responses in. And your responses are anonymized, obviously, so you'll be represented as a percentage of the participants when you put your answers in. And hopefully somebody answers these.
There we go. I got one answer. Less than 30%. It's okay. We're here to help. 50+%, pretty good. We got 66% of people so far on 50% plus. Keep it coming, guys and gals.
Yeah, but you're right. My experience has been as well in IoT the past 20 plus years. It's still hard to connect and deploy your connected devices for a variety of reasons. Oh, here we got more. Oh, one's at 75 plus. That's great. I'm going to keep this open for another 10 or 15 seconds and then shut her down.
Okay.
So it looks like what 62% are either somewhere in the 30 percentile or less. If this poll is accurate. Okay, I'm going to stop that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
Let's publish the poll results.
And poll.
I'm curious how it's going to show up.
Okay. While I figure that out, why don't you proceed?
Some people couldn't see the poll in full screen mode.
Okay, well, I ended it, so
it's all good. All right, the results are in. We got, we'll go from the bottom up. 30% of the people have less than 30% of their products connected. 30% are 30% or greater. 20% are 50% or greater, and 20% are 75% or greater. So first of all, I mean, congratulations to, the 75 percenters. It seems, that is certainly in the mainstream. If we just say that more than 50% is mainstream, then 40% of the people that responded to the poll are moving into that mainstream. But it's not easy, right? There's a lot of different complexities in IoT, and that is really the opportunity for us as an industry, is to continue to revisit those assumptions that we made about how we create value and how we make connected devices or connected operations a part of our enterprise strategies. And so I tested this. I went to a conference last week, actually called Field Service in Palm Springs, ready to talk about, folks entering the mainstream or helping them enter the mainstream. And as I looked left and I looked right and I looked at the agenda items, I was struck by something. And perhaps you guys have seen this trend before, but the agenda had AI on it, and then there was a little bit more AI on it, and it was pretty much all AI. And so I was like, where's IoT? I think there was one presentation from one of our partners, actually, Henny Penny, that presented, and it was a stark reminder of the hype cycles, right? We really do have a new entrant in the industry when it comes to, I think the LLM craze, the large language model craze, has been what is driving a lot of interest, because it's affecting us personally in our ability, to chat with our devices. And it made me sort of reframe a little bit how I talk about IoT. And so I feel like I have, this wealth of experience to share and join with customers and so forth. But you may have seen this trend on LinkedIn where everybody is all of a sudden an AI expert. I am becoming an AIoT expert. So like giving myself a certificate for AIoT awesomeness. And we do, have to talk about the AI capabilities and how they are ultimately enriched with IoT data, if we're going to keep the conversation relevant. And so for those of you who may be new to Cumulocity itself, the vision for Cumulocity is connecting the world for a better future. So we solve the 80%, right, of whether it's the southbound communication protocols, the device management, and how you scale that up to hundreds of thousands of devices or millions of devices quickly, the ability to have a digital twin and perform analytics with a low code or no code fashion through deeper deeper analytics that you can deploy via microservices on the platform. So it's a microservice architecture. It's multi-tenant. It can be deployed on Azure, AWS, on-prem, Alibaba. And it has the application interface with widgets that allow you to present that data. You can create your custom widgets, right? It gives you everything that you need, along with integration patterns with our Microsoft partner or with AWS to include that as part of an enterprise solution and free up that energy to really focus on your differentiators as a company, and again, translating that data into insights that ultimately drive actions for your business. And the feedback we get from our customers is good, typically 2 to 3 times faster to connect new and different device types and new and different use cases without having to update, maintain, change the guts of an IoT platform. And it's not just us, it's also recently, independent analysts, including Gartner, recently announced Software AG for the 3rd year running is still a leader in IoT. And we're in good company, right? The other 2 folks that are in that are orders of magnitude larger as a company, with Microsoft and in Azure, and then the AWS IoT portfolio. And we partner with those guys. So when it comes to the buy and integrate, or buy then build approach, Gartner, Forrester, Mock Nation, if you were to look at the independent analyst reports, they seem to also be validating that story, and it feels good to be in good company. And so if we're going to reframe the value proposition of IoT and turn it into AIoT, then we have kind of this diagram. And so that's me with longer hair and darker sunglasses. And I'm going to create an AI agent, or an AI companion. I'm going to call her Margaret. And she's going to have the voice of Scarlett Johansson from the movie Her. And she's going to help me interact with my devices in a natural way, using a large language model and applying it to integrating it in with Cumulocity. I'll be able to ask, hey, Margaret, how many devices are out of compliance and why? Or I can also prompt her to make changes to those devices if it's appropriate, right? So update the firmware for this group of devices in the field. And this technology is available today. I was encouraged when I saw the report back from the International User Group Conference that it already exists. Like, you can already fall in love with Margaret using Cumulocity. So the IUG, I think this year, was hosted in Dublin. I didn't have the chance to attend myself, but a few members of our team did. And they have a hackathon. So within a few hours, our partners, our customers, our product team got together, and within a few hours, we're able to demonstrate how Cumulocity is integrated with an LLM to essentially interact with the devices. That's the result of a prompt that you see there on the screen, where there's a sensor reading, something's a little bit out of whack. It could mean that your NOx levels are high. It could also mean that your sensor is faulty. And this was done within a couple of hours. So it's not like some great changes need to be made to the product. Cumulocity grew up outside of any walled garden. It's differentiated in its ability to integrate to other environments. So this integration is relatively straightforward. There's other investments we're also making in IoT. There's the use of AI Copilot for our feature development, as well as a natural language model way to interact with our user documentation. So you're going to start to see these types of solutions and these types of interactions with Cumulocity, moving forward, which is great. But it got me thinking, right? there's this problem of what happens if security isn't accounted for. Ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, you know, should I give myself permission to trust Margaret? Because Margaret's going to reflect the data that she's receiving. And so if somebody spoofs the device, what happens? How does that impact my solution? How am I accounting for that? And, you know, the inverse, will Margaret trust me if she knows who I really was? Like that's a pretty shady looking version of me, right? Pretty similar, but is it really me? Do I have the rights to access the information of these devices? And what should she share with me? And so that sort of ties back to the title. We can talk to our devices. What is it that we really want to say? And how do we make sure that we can trust? So I was having this conversation with Tyler in terms of the premise of this presentation. Tyler Gannon from Device Authority, and he introduced this idea of explicit versus implicit trust. I think naturally, whenever we hear something that sounds like a human voice, we tend to socially provide implicit trust. I mean, I certainly do. When I ask ChatGPT for a recipe, you know, for dinner tonight, and I ask it for what I think it's like cabbage and meat or something, I feed it, it gives me a recipe. I give it implicit trust that whatever it's going to give me is pretty good, and it's worked. But with IoT, there are consequences to our actions. The industrial IoT applications especially have devices that may be critical to revenue, critical to regulatory adherence, or even have safety implications. So they become targets. And so we need to ensure that for the responsible use of AI, we're not operating in an implicit trust model. We should be operating with explicit trust. And that's where the combination of Cumulocity IoT and device lifecycle management tools like KSAS really start to enable that responsible use of AI and ensure explicit trust. And sometimes it's a better together story. Sometimes it is necessary. It's not just optional. It becomes necessary in Cumulocity deployments. And I'll give a few examples, right? So if you have a global deployment of Cumulocity, then we are standing up dedicated SaaS instances for you in the different regions of the world. That could be Europe, it could be North America, it could be China, it could be Australia. And so if a device wakes up and it doesn't know which of those instances to phone home to, then it actually needs to check in with another service, authenticate to that service, receive its operational identity, and then Keyscaler can actually provide kind of the northbound endpoint that that device should go to, make sure that that's, you know, whitelisted in Cumulocity so that when the device tries to connect and phone home, it is doing so appropriately. So that's one example where it becomes necessary. The other would be in terms of best practices for development and test and production. Some customers, and we often recommend that you have separate instances of Cumulocity. Furthermore, those instances, so a device wakes up and it needs to know whether it's going to be in the development instance, the test instance, or the production instance. And oftentimes, those instances would have even different root certificates to ensure, even if somebody tries to connect the device, that somebody in development cannot accidentally update the firmware of a production unit without, you know, the appropriate identity. So when you add this to the other capabilities, I think it's a really powerful combination. I'm getting a question. As companies enrich the data sources apply logic and AI, how important is device trust? Yeah, I mean, I think it's everything, because if you can now trust that your devices have explicitly established trust, via a secure identity, now you can trust a device that when you interact with Margaret, you're able to trust that what she says about your devices is indeed true. There are additional benefits. One of the reasons that I love working with Device Authority is it's not just about the X509 certificate on the devices or the authentication or whitelisting. They continue to innovate beyond those capabilities. And there's a couple good examples that I picked out here. One is the trusting the person, trusting the guy with sunglasses, privileged access management, and this is a partnership with CyberArk. If it's possible to essentially put the access policy in a lightweight encrypted fashion directly on the device, such that whenever somebody requests information from the device, it knows that the person requesting the information is authorized to ask those questions. So that's where Margaret is able to identify, hey, am I supposed to tell the guy in sunglasses what's up? Device Authority does things like code signing, making sure that your software hasn't been tampered with as you're updating the firmware. Increasingly, there are regulatory pressures to report on the software bill of materials, or SBOM. And so there's a capability there to report on that. It's necessary to work, at least with the US government, but I think other industries are looking to adopt that. And continuous authorization. There's a lot of really cool technology inside KSAS and other products to essentially create a model for how the device behaves and how it talks into the network. And so if it starts to behave differently or starts to try to contact other places, then it flags it for enterprise IT to take a look and see what's up. And so you pair that with Cumulocity. We discussed about the ability to deploy in different regions. It is fully multi-tenant, which is a problem that was a tricky one to solve in my prior days. So full multi-tenancy is built in. It can be hosted in Azure, AWS, or Alibaba, with on-premise and even hybrid options. So you can have Cumulocity deployed locally at a store or at a facility, multiple stores and multiple facilities, and those are all coordinated by a cloud instance. And it's existing robust integrations with the partners of Azure and AWS, much like Device Authority. So ultimately,
we have another question, Miguel, actually. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, we use Bootstrap certs for our IoT devices and haven't had a problem. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so oftentimes it is a best practice, right? Like in manufacturing, you provide the Bootstrap certs for the devices, and then those devices are ultimately deployed. Sometimes it can get a little challenging when you're deploying it into somebody else's operation environment, right? So if I'm buying devices from multiple different vendors, they arrive and they've got their Bootstrap cert. And so I know that it is authentic for the vendor, but I have my own infrastructure for assigning an operational cert that is different than your Bootstrap cert. And so that's, I think, where people sometimes get in trouble is the Bootstrap cert exists so that you can integrate with your environment. But when that device has to then deploy into a different operating environment, if it needs a different operational cert, is it flexible enough to do that? Do you have the tools to change or distinguish between the Bootstrap cert and your operational cert? And that's certainly one of the things that Device Authority does well. And so together, I think it's absolutely possible to go into the great unknown hand in hand with our AI co-pilots and the responsible use of AI and IoT. And that's it.
It's an awesome presentation, Miguel. Thank you. I actually have one question for you directly. So you talked about build versus buy in one of your earlier slides. There have been some rather spectacular failures at this in the corporate world. Can you talk about maybe why that happened? I mean, the biggest one that comes to example is Predix, GE. There's many others. I'd just be interested more in your thoughts on the whole build versus buy.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to a Predix conference as I was Parker Hannifin. I was shopping for back end, and Predix was in its heyday, and they threw some good parties, man. I can tell you that they really did up the conferences well. I think that was the hype days, kind of where we are now with AI, that everybody has a program, all the CEOs are talking about it, everybody's throwing money at it. And it's, I think, a symptom of this adoption curve, that there is early market desire to capture the low-hanging fruit. And with IoT, I'm a big fan. Like I'm an IoT solution specialist. I think it's officially the senior IoT solution specialist. But I haven't found a single IoT solution yet in the market. It's either like a field service application, or it's a digital operations solution. It's ultimately an enterprise solution where IoT capabilities are necessary, but they're not necessarily the core business of those companies. And I think that's where people have gotten in trouble, is that when, a company that is really excellent at operating, power stations like GE builds this capability, they ultimately need to hire these huge teams with varied specialties and get those things certified. And it turns from a project into a product. And at the point at which you're moving from project to product, scaling up, you end up with all these various different use cases that you may not have expected across a variety of problem sets. So when you build these fundamental capabilities, all of a sudden there's pressure coming from 10, 15, 20 different angles that you could not have expected when you first built the basic capabilities of an IoT platform. And I think if you keep going down that route, you either have the capital and the will and see it as part of your core business, or you run into these 48% where substantial changes are needed in order to scale things at a deployment. I think that's where a lot of people, even some of the hyperscalers recently, frankly, have made those decisions. One of our newest partnerships is with SAP. So they're deprecating Leonardo IoT in favor of using Cumulocity IoT. That was announced last year. And I think it's just another example where it either, like, building IoT as a product with these fundamental capabilities that you see in this triangle over here, it's either your core business or it's not. For us, it's everything that we do. So it is our product, and we make sure that that's going to be available and scalable and deployable and flexible and multi-tenant. Like, we do all those things so that our customers don't have to. Oftentimes right now, some of the best conversations we have are with people that started in the build approach and want to accelerate their capabilities at a much lower total cost of ownership. And so I think that's where everybody has learned some tough lessons, GE included, certainly. And, we want to partner with those people together with the hyperscalers that they probably built those platforms on, right? This is, it doesn't have to be a competitive situation when if a customer can be more successful because they're spending less of that time and energy in places that don't differentiate their platform and accelerate the success of the product, then everybody wins, the hyperscalers included. And that's why we partner so closely with them. That's why we have, white papers on how to integrate with Azure and white papers on how to integrate with AWS, because we understand that we're a part of a bigger solution. And that's really, I think a lot of the work that's happening in this phase of the industry is going from early adoption to scale adoption, where a buy and then integrate is preferred.
Great. Yeah, great answer. And I think that brings us to the end of the session. Miguel, awesome presentation, some good questions, interesting polling numbers. We at Device Authority, Miguel, would like to thank you for your time as well as our audience. And the next session begins at 30 minutes past the hour. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you to everybody that joined. Please hit me up on LinkedIn. Would love to catch up with you again and reconnect.
Outstanding. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Cheers.